It costs less than a used car. It has no armor, no crew, and no sophisticated weapons system. It looks like something a determined hobbyist might build in their garage over a long weekend. And yet, this simple machine has done what decades of Western naval doctrine said was impossible. It has driven one of the world's largest navies out of an entire sea. The weapon we are talking about is Ukraine's naval drone, and what it has accomplished against Russia's Black Sea Fleet is rewriting the rules of modern warfare in real time. For decades, Russia's Black Sea Fleet was considered one of the most powerful naval forces in the region. It was home to missile cruisers, guided missile frigates, landing ships, and submarines capable of launching cruise missiles at targets across Europe. When the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in February 2022, this fleet was supposed to dominate the coastline, threaten Odessa, and project power across the entire northern Black Sea. Russian military planners assumed that Ukrainian coastal cities would fall within days under the combined pressure of ground assault and naval bombardment. The fleet would then control the entire Ukrainian coastline, sealing off the country from any possibility of resupply or export through the Black Sea. That was the plan. What happened instead was something that no military strategist would have predicted 3 years ago. And it starts with understanding what Ukraine was truly facing when the invasion began. We will get to the full scope of the destruction in a moment, but first, you need to understand what makes this situation so remarkable. Ukraine did not defeat Russia's navy with its own navy. Ukraine does not have a navy to speak of. What remained of its naval forces after Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea was minimal. A handful of patrol boats, some aging Soviet-era vessels, and very little in the way of coastal defense systems. On paper, this should have been no contest at all. Russia had destroyers, Ukraine had desperation. Russia had cruise missiles, Ukraine had ingenuity. And that ingenuity changed everything. The weapon at the center of this story goes by several names. Some call it an unmanned surface vehicle. Others call it a sea drone or a maritime drone. Ukraine's military intelligence, known by its Ukrainian acronym as the Main Directorate of Intelligence, simply calls it a tool of asymmetric warfare. Whatever the label, the concept is straightforward. Take a small boat, pack it with explosives, add a camera and a guidance system, and send it directly at an enemy ship. The drone does not need to return. It does not need to survive. It only needs to reach its target and detonate on impact. The simplicity of this weapon is exactly what makes it so effective. According to public reporting from multiple defense analysts, including assessments from the Royal United Services Institute, these drones cost somewhere between $20,000 and $200,000 each, depending on the variant and the sophistication of their guidance systems. Some of the earliest versions were reportedly built for even less, using commercially available components and modified recreational watercraft. Compare that to the ships they are destroying. Russia's Moskva missile cruiser, which sank in April 2022 after being struck by Ukrainian Neptune missiles, was valued at approximately $750 million. The Moskva was the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, a symbol of Russian naval power, and its loss sent shockwaves through the military establishment. The guided missile frigate Admiral Makarov, reportedly damaged in subsequent attacks, represents a similar investment. Landing ships like the Novocherkassk, which was destroyed in December 2023 according to Ukrainian and independent reports, cost tens of millions of dollars each. We are talking about a ratio of destruction that would make any military accountant weep with either joy or despair depending on which side of the equation they sit. Now here's where it gets interesting. The initial attacks were crude. Early Ukrainian naval drones were essentially modified jet skis with explosives strapped to them. They were slow, they were unreliable, and Russia's navy initially dismissed them as a nuisance. Some early attempts failed spectacularly. Drones broke down before reaching their targets. Others were spotted and destroyed by ships' defensive guns. Russian commanders reportedly joked about the primitive technology their enemy was deploying. That dismissal would prove to be a catastrophic miscalculation, because what Russia failed to understand was that Ukraine was not just building weapons. Ukraine was building a learning system. Every attack provided data, every failure provided lessons, and every success provided proof of concept. that encouraged further investment and development. The engineers behind these programs, many of them working out of anonymous workshops in cities far from the front lines, treated each mission as an experiment. What worked was duplicated and improved. What failed was analyzed and redesigned. This iterative approach, familiar to anyone in the technology industry, was being applied to weapons development at a pace that traditional military procurement processes simply cannot match. By the middle of 2023, Ukraine's naval drones had evolved into something far more sophisticated. They were faster, more maneuverable, harder to detect, and capable of operating in swarms. Some variants reportedly carry over 400 kilograms of explosives, enough to cause catastrophic damage to even large warships. Others are equipped with electronic warfare countermeasures to defeat Russian jamming systems. There are reports, not yet independently verified, of drones capable of submerging briefly to avoid detection or to pass under defensive booms. The Garage project had become a genuine weapons program. The results speak for themselves. According to assessments compiled by the Institute for the Study of War and corroborated by open-source intelligence analysts tracking satellite imagery and port activity, Ukraine has damaged or destroyed more than 20 Russian naval vessels using these drones since the start of the full-scale invasion. The exact numbers remain difficult to verify independently, and both sides have incentives to either inflate or minimize the reported damage. Ukraine wants to boost morale and demonstrate success to international partners. Russia wants to hide the extent of its losses. However, what cannot be disputed is the strategic outcome. Russia's Black Sea Fleet has been forced to withdraw from its historic home port of Sevastopol to bases further east, primarily in Novorossiysk. Satellite imagery confirms that the harbor at Sevastopol, once crowded with warships, now sits largely empty. This represents the first time since the Crimean War in the 1850s that the fleet has been pushed out of the Crimean Peninsula. Let that sink in for a moment. A nation without a navy has effectively evicted one of the world's great naval powers from waters it has controlled for over 2 centuries, and it did so using weapons that cost less than most people's cars. But here is what most analysis misses about this situation. The success of Ukraine's naval drones is not just about technology, and it is about the intersection of technology, geography, and strategic context that made this particular weapon devastating in this particular conflict. Understanding these factors is essential because they determine whether this model can be replicated elsewhere. Start with geography. The Black Sea is essentially a closed body of water with limited access points through the Turkish Straits. Under the Montreux Convention of 1936, Turkey controls passage through the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, and it has restricted warship transit since the start of the conflict. This means that any Russian ship damaged in the Black Sea cannot easily be replaced. Russia cannot simply sail reinforcements from its Northern Fleet or Pacific Fleet to make up for losses. Every loss is permanent. Every hit matters. In every successful drone attack, removes a piece from the board that cannot be put back. Compare this to a hypothetical conflict in open ocean, where a damaged fleet could be reinforced from other naval assets around the world. A navy fighting in the Atlantic or Pacific has options for retreat, repair, and reinforcement that simply do not exist in the Black Sea. Russia is playing with a fixed deck of cards, and Ukraine keeps removing cards from the table one attack at a time. Geography also favors the attacker in terms of concealment and launch points. Ukraine's coastline, while limited after the loss of Crimea in 2014, still provides access to the northwestern Black Sea. More importantly, Ukraine's naval drones can be launched from almost anywhere, including from the back of trucks driven to secluded beaches. They do not require naval bases, deep water ports, or the massive logistical infrastructure that traditional naval operations demand. A team of 3 or 4 people can transport a drone to a launch point, put it in the water, and send it on its way to a target hundreds of kilometers distant. This distributed launch capability makes them nearly impossible to suppress through preemptive strikes. Russia cannot bomb what it cannot find, and every beach along the Ukrainian coast, every river mouth flowing into the Black Sea, becomes a potential launch site. Then there is the question of detection and defense once the drones are underway. Russian warships were designed to fight other warships. Their radar systems are optimized to detect aircraft, missiles, and large surface vessels. A small fiberglass drone sitting low in the water, and especially at night or in rough seas, presents a radar cross-section that is almost indistinguishable from wave clutter. The human eye is no better. Even in daylight, spotting a dark object barely rising above the waterline at distances of several kilometers is extraordinarily difficult. The Russian Navy has been forced to adapt, deploying more helicopters for patrol, adding machine gun positions to ship decks, and reportedly even stretching nets around vessel hulls to prematurely detonate incoming drones before they can reach the hull. Some of these measures have worked to varying degrees. Ships with helicopter support are better protected than those without. But every resource devoted to drone defense is a resource not available for other missions. Every helicopter flying patrol is not flying reconnaissance or strike missions elsewhere. The opportunity cost of defensive measures compounds over time, and the fundamental problem remains unsolved. These ships were not built to defend against this kind of threat, and retrofitting them with effective countermeasures is slow, expensive, and only partially successful. What compounds Russia's difficulties is the asymmetry in cost that we mentioned earlier. Ukraine can build dozens of naval drones for the price of a single anti-ship missile. Even if Russia manages to destroy 90% of incoming drones, the ones that get through can still inflict disproportionate damage. A ship that costs hundreds of millions of dollars can be crippled or sunk by a weapon costing less than a compact car. This is the mathematics of attrition warfare applied to naval combat, and it heavily favors the side with cheaper weapons. Consider the equation from the Russian perspective. To protect a single major warship, you need constant aerial surveillance, electronic warfare support, multiple defensive gun positions manned around the clock, and crews on high alert for threats that might appear at any moment from any direction. The stress alone degrades operational effectiveness over time. Sailors who spend every watch scanning the horizon for small dark shapes in the water are sailors who cannot perform their other duties at peak efficiency. We should pause here to address something important. The success of Ukraine's naval drones does not mean that traditional navies are obsolete. This is a conclusion that some observers have jumped to, and it is almost certainly wrong. Large surface vessels still perform functions that no drone can replicate, including power projection, command and control, humanitarian operations, and sustained presence in contested waters. An aircraft carrier provides capabilities that no collection of small drones can match. What the Black Sea experience demonstrates is not the end of the warship, but rather the emergence of a new threat category that navies worldwide must now take seriously. Just as the torpedo changed naval warfare in the early 20th century, and just as guided missiles changed it again in the mid-20th century, naval drones represent the next evolution in the long history of maritime conflict. Navies will adapt, they always do. But the adaptation will require significant investment and a willingness to question assumptions that have guided naval strategy for generations. The United States Navy has been watching these developments closely. According to reporting from Naval News and statements from defense officials, the service is accelerating its own research into countering drone swarm attacks, while simultaneously exploring how to incorporate similar capabilities into its own arsenal. Every major naval power is now asking the same question. If a nation like Ukraine can achieve this with improvised weapons and a shoestring budget, what could a well-funded adversary accomplish with dedicated development programs? China, which has the industrial capacity and technological sophistication to mass-produce advanced naval drones, presents an obvious concern for American strategists thinking about a potential Taiwan scenario. Now, let us talk about what this means for Russia specifically, because the impacts extend far beyond the loss of ships. The withdrawal of the Black Sea Fleet from Crimea has cascading consequences for Russia's entire war effort and its broader strategic position. First, it removes the constant threat of amphibious assault that hung over Odessa for the first year of the war. In the early months of the invasion, Ukrainian forces had to dedicate significant resources to defending the coastline against a potential naval landing. With the Black Sea Fleet pushed back and its landing ships depleted, that threat has effectively evaporated. Ukrainian forces previously assigned to coastal defense can now be redeployed to other fronts. Second, the reduced naval presence reopens the possibility of grain exports through the Black Sea. Ukraine is one of the world's largest exporters of wheat and other agricultural commodities. Before the war, these exports moved primarily through Black Sea ports. Russia's naval blockade threatened to choke off this trade entirely. Ships carrying Ukrainian grain are now transiting routes that would have been suicidal to attempt when the Black Sea fleet was operating at full strength from Sevastopol. Third, and perhaps most importantly from a geopolitical perspective, the defeat damages Russian prestige in ways that cannot be quantified but should not be underestimated. Naval power has always been about more than just military capability. It is about perception, influence, and the projection of strength. When a nation's fleet is forced to flee from weapons that cost less than a family sedan, it sends a message that reverberates far beyond the immediate theater of conflict. Russia's partners and clients around the world are watching and drawing their own conclusions about the reliability of Russian military equipment and doctrine. There is also the psychological dimension within Russia itself. The Black Sea Fleet is not just any naval formation. It carries deep historical and symbolic weight in Russian national identity. Sevastopol, the fleet's traditional home, has been celebrated in Russian culture for centuries as a hero city, a symbol of sacrifice and resilience during the Crimean War and again during the Second World War. And being driven out of that port by a country that Russia expected to defeat in weeks is a humiliation that cuts to the core of national self-image. But here is where the situation becomes more complicated. Russia is not simply accepting defeat. It is adapting, learning, and looking for countermeasures. Recent months have seen reports of improved Russian air defenses over the Black Sea, more aggressive patrols by helicopters and aircraft, and attempts to harden remaining ships against drone attacks. Some analysts, including those writing for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, have noted that Russian losses to naval drones may have decreased in late 2024 and early 2025 compared to the peak period in 2023. This brings us to a crucial question. Has Ukraine's naval drone advantage peaked? Or is this just the beginning of a longer technological competition? The honest answer is that no one knows for certain. What we can observe is that both sides are evolving rapidly. Ukraine continues to develop new drone variants, including some reportedly capable of longer ranges and carrying heavier payloads. There are also unconfirmed reports of drones equipped with missiles for attacking targets beyond direct impact range. On the Russian side, electronic warfare capabilities have improved, and the Navy appears to be taking the threat more seriously than it did in the early months of the war. What seems clear is that the genie cannot be put back in the bottle. The concept of the naval attack drone has been proven in combat, and that proof will drive development programs worldwide. Within a decade, every Navy will need both offensive drone capabilities and robust defenses against them. The balance of power at sea may shift in ways that benefit smaller nations with limited budgets but creative engineers. For Ukraine, the naval drone campaign represents one of the genuine success stories of the war. In a conflict marked by grinding attrition, stalemate along much of the front line, and enormous human cost, the ability to achieve disproportionate results against a nominally superior enemy provides both practical and psychological benefits. Every Russian ship forced out of Sevastopol is a reminder that David can still wound Goliath, even if he cannot yet slay him entirely. As we look ahead, several key indicators will reveal how this situation develops. Watch for reports on the tempo of drone attacks and their success rates. Pay attention to whether Russia redeploys additional air defense assets to protect naval installations. Monitor any changes in grain shipment volumes through the Black Sea corridor, as these serve as a proxy for the actual level of Russian naval threat to commercial traffic. And keep an eye on Ukrainian announcements about new drone variants or capabilities, which often signal the next phase of the technological competition. The competition itself may prove as important as any individual battle, determining not just the outcome of this war, but the shape of naval warfare for decades to come. What we are witnessing in the Black Sea is not just a local tactical situation, it is a glimpse of future warfare, a demonstration that the assumptions underlying military planning for the past 50 years may need fundamental revision. The aircraft carrier, the guided missile cruiser, the amphibious assault ship, all of these platforms that have defined naval power for generations are now being challenged by weapons that can be built in small workshops and deployed from the back pickup trucks. The story of how something shockingly simple destroyed Russia's navy is not really about the drones themselves. It is about adaptability, innovation under pressure, and the willingness to challenge assumptions about how wars are fought. It is about a nation that was told it could not compete with Russian military power finding creative ways to rewrite the rules. And it is about the broader lesson that in modern warfare, expensive and complex does not always beat cheap and clever. Sometimes the simple solution is the one that works. The Black Sea Fleet still exists. It still has ships, submarines, and missiles. But it no longer operates freely in its own waters, and that change was brought about not by a rival superpower but by improvised weapons piloted via satellite link from undisclosed locations hundreds of kilometers away. That is the reality of warfare in the 21st century. And for military planners around the world, it is a reality that demands urgent attention before the next conflict reveals who learned the lessons of the Black Sea and who did not. This video is for educational and news commentary purposes only, based on publicly available information. Details may evolve as new reporting emerges.